Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic.
And my name is Howard Eber, and I too am a recovered addict and alcoholic. Steve, I sent you a chat message, incidentally.
Oh, okay. Uh-oh, am I in trouble? Okay. Well, I'll check it out. Um, yeah, Howard, go ahead.
Okay, we are in more about alcoholism, and I've got a sheet prepared here for this. If I could find it, give me a moment, and I'll put it up. It kind of is an overview. Um, to help us put in perspective what this chapter is about. And rather than just babbling on, let me just show it to you here. What I've done is there are four stories in this chapter, and each story has a lie. Each story has a point at which the person who we're talking about has made a decision based on that lie. They're alcoholics. No, they cannot drink. They made a decision based on that. What was their decision? What lie did they fall prey to? And what was the outcome? And we already talked about the man of 30 who believed that he knew he was an alcoholic. He knew that once he started to drink, he could not stop, but he wanted to succeed in business very badly. So he thought his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink like other men. So he remained sober for 25 years. He was, in Bill's words, an exceptional man, and he must have been. But after 25 years, he retired, had made his money. Out came his slippers and a bottle. That was his action. And what happened? The outcome was he went to pieces quickly and died, drank himself to death within 4 years. And then we met our friend Jim, the car salesman. Jim believed that he could drink whiskey if he put it in a glass of milk. Not just disgusting, it's just horrible. But that's what he decided to do. He knew he was an alcoholic. He decided if he had a glass of milk with his alcohol, he wouldn't get drunk. So he ordered the whiskey, poured it in the milk. The experiment went so well, he ordered more and more and more. And the end result was one more journey to the asylum and the mental and physical suffering drinking always caused him. This is a story about a guy who wanted wanted to stop drinking. See, the man of 30 made a conscious decision to go back to drinking. That when I reach this point, I'm going to go back to drinking. Jim, the car salesman, made the decision based on a lie, but he did not want to go on drinking. He wanted to stop and found he could not. And then we talked about the Jaywalker. We talked about, did we get to the Jaywalker yet?
Nope.
No. So I'm not going to let you in on a secret about the Jaywalker. We'll talk about that a little later on.
So we actually have one more paragraph before the Jaywalker. We kind of let off, and it's page 37, and it says, in some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we were obligated to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient and the like what always happened. We now see that when we began drinking deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of pre-meditation of what terrible consequences would be. He's referring, of course, back to the whiskey and the milk and all that we read last week. So, yeah, anything you want to say in one little paragraph?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Incidentally, one of the things about every one of these stories has a story behind it. And the Jaywalker story, where did that come from? It wasn't just Bill's creation. Apparently, this is a story that was told by Sam Shoemaker when he wanted to talk to people who didn't understand alcoholism. He gave this story, this analogy, as a way to show how absurd and incomprehensible their behavior is. And Bill liked that, so he adopted it for this story. But the paragraph that Steve just started off with, has something extraordinarily interesting in it. And let me just go over a few things. First of all, it starts out by saying, here we got another nervous guy. Every one of the guys in this story, there's a nervous disposition. He had a nervous breakdown. This guy is nervous, but he's worried, he's angry, he's depressed, he's jealous. Welcome to the party, pal. In any case, it says that we now see, and this is the point I want to draw your attention to. If you look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines up, begins with five lines up from the bottom of the paragraph. There's a sentence that says, we now see. I'm going to ask you to highlight the rest of that paragraph because I'm going to make a suggestion about this and see what you think. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately. Now, what is drinking deliberately? Drinking deliberately is drinking because I'm angry, I'm worried, I'm depressed, I'm jealous, I'm nervous. All of those things he talks about at the beginning of the paragraph. We drink deliberately because I'm pissed off. Anyone ever drink at somebody? Okay, that's what we're talking about. Is drinking deliberately for a reason like that. So he says we saw that when we began to drink deliberately instead of casually. And what is casually? Casually is drinking like the alcoholic, giving into the obsession, triggering the allergy, being now caught in the grip of the craving that happens as a result of our allergic reaction to alcohol. So he's saying that if we start drinking deliberately instead of casually, there's little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation. What is effective thought? Effective thought is are thoughts that succeed, are thoughts that are effective. And so if the thought is to not take the drink, he's saying that if you begin drinking deliberately, there's little serious effective thought during the period premeditation. I insist that whether you start drinking deliberately or casually, and the word instead should be changed to as well as casually, and see if it sounds different now. We now see that when we began to drink deliberately as well as casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. The point being that whether we start drinking for a reason or because we're alcoholics, there is little effective thought beforehand, because if we did have effective thought, we wouldn't take that drink. Whether we're nervous or alcoholics, it doesn't matter. The premeditation process was ineffective because it didn't succeed in stopping us from taking the drink. So the fact that we're drinking for a reason or drinking because we're alcoholic, the premeditation, the consideration about whether we should take that drink or not is ineffective. It fails. And how do I know it fails? Because we wind up taking that drink. So it's just something to think about, that whether we start for this reason or that reason, it's the same thing. We didn't have enough thought ahead of time because we don't have the ability to do that because we're powerless against the first drink. Steve, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. So, this book, Howard mentioned all the stories that we covered in this chapter. There's so many great stories in this book. I'm not talking about stories in the back of the book. I'm talking about stories in the, beginning. But, the guy who accepted this, the money from a bitter rival and all that stuff like that. But my personal favorite is this Jaywalker story, partly because was like, what the heck when I read it. But then it's to me, it's almost like a parable. And what's interesting is, so one of the best companions you can ever have is this for a big book. This is a 1930s Webster Dictionary. Now, I don't know if the people with 30s had better eyes than we did, but this is the writing in there is extreme. You need a magnifying glass. But so I'm not going to read it, but I also have a pocket dictionary. My aunt, that's even smaller. It's like, I guess they had better eyes back then. But my aunt was the head librarian of a library, and so when she passed, they got handed down to my dad, and he just says, "You want these books?" And one of them was these two dictionaries, Varied Religious Experiences, all sorts of cool books. So a 1930 um, definition of a parable defines a parable as a, like a modern dictionary says a parable is a short story intended to teach a moral principle, but a 19th century dictionary says a parable as a short story using everyday events to teach a moral lesson or spiritual truth. See, it's a little bit different there. You're using everyday lessons. And that's exactly what the point of the Jaywalker is. He's using a simple kindergarten lesson, event of jaywalking so the reader can, understand this. And like I'm going to call it parable, is not meant to relate to with jaywalking. Its purpose is to help you understand the mindset prior to it. So let's take a look at it. It says our behavior is absurd and incomprehensible, which means unintelligent, with the respect to the first rank, let's say individual, with a passion for jaywalking. You could also say, obsession could be the same word as passion. Um, so jaywalking, you got to look at it. I mean, Shoemaker probably came up with this story probably in the early 20s, and my guess would be. So if you let's go to New York in the early 20s, around New York, didn't have cars in a lot of the cities. In New York, you had cars, you had light posts, you had all sorts of things. You know, you had the Roaring Twenties happening. So these guys from the hills would come down and they would be amazed and they would walk into the streets and they didn't call them Hicks back then, they called them Jays. So a guy would say, "Get out of the street, Jay," and basically the Jaywalker, so people would call they got the nickname Jaywalker, and for anyone that walk in the street. So the modern dictionary defines jaywalking to cross the street or the road unlawfully. But the 1930s dictionary, this one got me. It's jaywalk is defined as one who crosses the street endangering themselves and the lives of others. It wasn't against the law to jaywalk. So they just put a simple definition there, one who crosses the street endangering the life of others. The older definition is a perfect emphasis on jaywalking as being dangerous. He's not only putting his life in danger, but also others. But does he care? That's the thing. Is he going to say to himself, before he jumps off the curb, what, I might really hurt someone in this situation. Does he know it's dangerous at all? He is not doing it to jaywalk. Let's just look at what it says here. He gets a thrill. Another word for thrill you could say is buzz, out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. So he likes to rush. He gets, and barely gets hit, and he gets a thrill out of that. Howard, do you want to comment on any of the stuff I just mentioned?
Yeah, basically, I mean, there's not much to add to it, but that term jaywalker came from actually it was Jay drivers, they called them.
Oh,
But
okay.
basically, they were called rubes, they were greenhorns, they were idiots, basically, who drove a horse-drawn carriage on the wrong side of the road. That's where that terminology came from. And then they just transferred it to people who would walk across the street again in the wrong part of the road, middle of the street. Just an interesting history lesson on jaywalkers and what jay means.
Right. Says he enjoys himself. Now, see, the interesting thing in here is it's it's the progression that's interesting in here. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Sound familiar? Up to this point, you would label him a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. That means strange ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured, slightly, several times in succession. So maybe he scrapes his arm, like when you fell off a bike as a kid. You expect him if he were normal, there's the condition normal to cut it out. So when this guy barely escapes the car, does he say to himself, "Wow, that was close. I better stop"? No, he goes out and does it again and again. He gets the ominous warning from friends and family and everyone else, but then he gets hurt over and over again, a little bit. A normal person would say, "I'm done with this thing." It's kind of like think when you were a kid, when you fell off your bike riding a certain way, you changed the way you rode. But it says the condition if you were normal. A normal person wouldn't do that. Presently, now it gets worse. He is hit again, this time as a fractured skull. Now, again, if he was normal, this is now we're talking, this is not scraping the arm, this is a life-threatening injury, a fractured skull, you know, almost can kill someone, you know, and we still have not answered the question if he was normal, but I think we've already answered that. Within a week after leaving the hospital for the fractured skull, a fast-moving trolley breaks his arm. Interesting. You mean to tell me that, when this guy on the way home from the hospital, from the rehab, whatever you want to call it, for a fractured skull that almost killed him, he does it again. What else would you expect? You have anything you want to comment on that, Howard?
Uh, yeah, basically, you know, these things that we're talking about, these injuries, I'm going to rephrase it. These injuries would be pointless, would be academic if he never stepped out in front of the first fast moving car. So, what is the guy's real problem? Problem is he gets a thrill. In other words, he likes the effect created, he likes the sensation created by dodging in front of the cars. And that sensation is so elusive that for a while he can't admit that it's injurious. Injurious. Does that sound familiar? It begins to feel normal to him. Isn't this exactly what Dr. Silkworth said about us in the beginning? And they also just the next paragraph incidentally begins with, through the years, this conduct continues. Well, what is this conduct? That takes me back to the doctor's opinion, because the doctor said in the doctor's opinion that this behavior is repeated over and over and over again. And what is he talking about? Periods of outrageous intoxication, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety, followed by periods of unbearable intoxication, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety. That's continued over and over again. And in this case, it's running into the cars, being in the hospital, getting out, and running in front of the cars, being in the hospital, getting out, over and over again. That's our national anthem, incidentally. This time I really mean it. I'm done. Right?
So,
He says he's decided to stop for good, right? There's the national anthem. Sorry, Steve.
no, go ahead. I was agreeing with you. So, what happened to him last time, it didn't even come to mind. So there's a strange mental blank spots, right? Supposed to, even more insanity to ponder, in front of, he's going to jump in front of the fast moving trolley, and it says he decided, he tells he decided to stop at jaywalking for good, swears off jaywalking forever. He's done. The big question is this, can he stay stopped? Can he keep the jaywalking idea out of his head? You
In
know,
other words, he's passing through this spree, emerging remorseful with a firm determination not to do it again. Does that sound familiar?
and Howard mentioned the nervous disposition, right? What's the guy's mindset when he's not jaywalking? Is he restless, irritable, and discontent? Does he have things in his life that, he's not dealing with it? You know, is he blaming his life on secondary circumstances instead of looking at everything else around it? You know, is he always thinking about jaywalking? You know, and is he telling old jaywalking stories? I don't think so, but you know, no, he's insane trying to fight off this blinding idea of jaywalking and doesn't jaywalk. Don't jaywalk no matter what is what he's doing. But in a few weeks he breaks both legs. So look at that progression. A fractured skull was the tip of the iceberg. That would be a bottom for most people, and he breaks both legs. And look what it says here. This is when this hooked me in. This is when the hook got me on this one. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful, keep off the streets altogether. So here's the unmanageability. This is the unmanageability kicks in. He can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he's held up to ridicule. And look at this. How many people have tried this with alcoholism or drug addiction? He tries every means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head, the a jaywalking obsession, we'll say, out of his head. He shuts him up in asylum, rehab, hoping to mend his ways. So that should be his bottom. He can't work. His wife left him, goes to, rehab for jaywalkers, where can't get the idea out of his head. You know, so he's leaving this rehab. He's done. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire truck, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? The same day he leaves rehab, we'll say, he races in front of a fire truck, which is faster and bigger than the trolley. So now he's going to bigger things. How many times have you known someone, and even maybe in your early recovery, you went for first rehab I ever went, well, the third one I went to, I jumped them, and this guy talked the whole time. You remember those guys in rehab that just talk, talk, talk the whole time they were there? And they're the first guys to relapse. And he came back strapped down to a gurney, and I'm in rehab still, and I'm like, how dare he do that? He left the day he drank. I mean, he drank the day he left. I had no idea, and guess what I did? The same thing. You may think our illustration is ridiculous, but is it? Hmm. We who have been through the ringer have to admit, if we substitute alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. How intelligent we may have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we've been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Absolutely. Howard, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just have one a couple of things. Um, we just read about the first that he'd only felt the first nip of the ringer, and I didn't really know what the hell that was about when I first came across it. So I have some visual aid to kind of help make it easier to understand. The ringer, when back in the day, when drying clothes was not throwing it in the dryer. After you did your wash in a big bucket, you put the clothes through this wringer and squeeze the water and the soap out of it. But sometimes, as you see, people got their finger caught in it, and you only feel the nip of the wringer because you pull your finger out of it right away. But that's what he's talking about when he says that he'd only felt the nip of the wringer. And what was the other thing I wanted to point out to you? Throw on through the years, this conduct continues, right? I'm going to complete that sentence a little differently. On through the years, this conduct continues. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of his recovery. Does that sound familiar? It's what Dr. Silkworth said about us. An entire psychic change. Why is it a psychic change? Because as we said in the middle of this paragraph, he tries every known means of jaywalking to get it out of his head because it's in his head. It's not in his mind. The problem is not the alcohol causing us to crave it. The problem is the obsession that convinces us we don't have a problem with alcohol. And the same thing with the jaywalker. He's got it in his head. So self-knowledge, inadequate, higher power, self-determination, self-knowledge, self-control, all of the things that we've gone through up until now about alcoholism, we've now experienced with the jaywalker. Every one of those are inadequate, insufficient, higher powers. It didn't stop him from doing it. Um, I think that's it.
I mean, this guy, I mean, he can read every book on the dangers of jaywalking. He can listen to all the testimonies that there are. You can talk to others who nearly died, or maybe the police will tell him stories. You can go to 90 jaywalker now it's means in 90 days, know every single experience. He's still going to do it. And the consequences won't even come to mind. So, he's going to, do it against his will. It's truly, drives home the power of the obsession, the underlying truth that self-knowledge avails nothing. You know, we don't respond to reason. Let's look at the next paragraph. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell me is true, but it doesn't fully apply.
We're always looking for loopholes, aren't we?
So this is I don't know how many sponsors. I go to a lot of rehabs to sponsor at, and some guys, I'll lay it all out for them as I hear their story. I can't convince them they're alcoholic, but they'll get it. And this is what the next week I'll come in there and they'll tell me this. Yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we made some of these might have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes as you fellow did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. Could that be the obsession talking? We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend. Now here's that sponsee slamming the door in your face. Thanks for the information. I've gotten the thanks for the information many times. You know, maybe not in those exact words, but that's pretty much what it's been. Got a couple of diatoms in my ears too. Howard, do you want to comment on that little paragraph?
Yeah, that last one. It's thanks for the information, pal. Kiss my ass. That's what should
That's
come after that sentence. Thanks for the information. Kiss my ass. The previous paragraph, until I forgot to mention something, we've just read that if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. My friend Terry says that this is a book of mirrors. And when we read a story like that, it makes it so graphic. This is a book of mirrors. It's us. We see ourselves all over the place. And at the bottom of the page, we have not lost everything in life through drinking. Um, this is not about how much we lost. This is not about how much we drank, what we drank, how often we drank. Same thing as this guy. It doesn't matter what cars you ran in front of, buses, trolleys. It doesn't make a difference. It's all the same thing. With us and same with them, it's not about the alcohol. It's about our relationship in terms of power, choice, and control when it comes to alcohol. It's not about how much, it's not about the consequences, it's not about any of those things. It's whether we have any power, choice, or control. And that's the same thing as this guy. He says, we have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly don't intend to. That infers that he still thinks he's got a choice. If you say I still intend to do, you still think you have a choice about this, which is why he says thanks for the information, bud. Kiss my butt. Doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, I like what you said. Terry said, and I heard him say it before too. Is it's a book of mirrors, and it's interesting though. When I first read this, like I said earlier, I thought this story was ridiculous. But as my years in rehab, I always read it again, and then when I started to kind of line myself up with, oh, I can't work anymore, I can't do this anymore, and the different consequences, it started to make sense. Like the book started talking to me. Let's see what else it says here. That may be true to certain non-alcoholic people who, through drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is the point we wish to emphasize and reemphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers as it's been revealed to us out of bitter experience. Let us take another illustration. Um, Howard, you want to talk about Fred Harry Brick?
Yeah, before Fred Harry Brick, um, the sentence, but the actual potential alcoholic, when I was in school, you used to get report cards, and report cards used to always have a comment at the bottom from the teacher. And my report card always had something along the lines of how it has great potential, how it shows great potential. He has great potential. This is the only time that I actually lived up to my potential. The actual real alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will not be able to stop on the basis of self-knowledge. I lived up to that one. That was a potential I actually showed success with. Yeah, we're talking about the story here. Fred is based on a man by the name of Harry Brick. Let me put this up for you. I think I have it handy here, so bear with me a second.
You gotta love these guys' names too. Roland Hazard, Harry Brick.
Yeah, uh, Throckmorton, right?
Right.
Quack, Zebra Graves, Zebra Quackenbush Graves. And where do these names come from? Unbelievable. But we're talking about Harry Brick here, and let me get it for you so you could see it. I could see it on my end, but you can't yet, so let me get it for you. When there's Harry Brick. Okay. There's also a picture of the guy we're talking about, Harry Brick. That's who this story is based on. Um, Harry, the significant thing about Harry is that Harry was very wealthy. If you look down, let me see if I can blow this up a little bit and get to the bottom of it. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. Uh, his story is the shortest in the first edition. He had only one point that he wanted to make in his story, which incidentally was called A Different Slant. It was in the first edition, was removed, and I'll show you where you could find it in a moment. It was the shortest story in the first edition because he said he only had one point he wanted to make. And the point is this: even a man with everything money can buy, a man with tremendous pride and willpower to function in all ordinary circumstances, could become an alcoholic and find himself as hopeless and helpless as the man who has a multitude of worries and troubles. Dr. Earl, who is a physician, Heal Themselves, wrote that story, described this as the skid row of success. Harry served on the first board of trustees of the Alcoholic Foundation, replacing Bill Rudell. Soon, Harry was drunk and had to step down as well. But that's who we're talking about. Is this guy Harry Brick? Um, he had a high bottom, if you want to use that, but it didn't make a difference. He was on top of the world the day he drank. He hadn't been in 6 or 7 rehabs. He hadn't been through what a lot of these other people went through. Yet he's an alcoholic like every one of us. So that's the background on this. Oh, I told you I'd tell you about the story. Story, A Different Slant, was removed from the first edition, and you'll find it now in this book, Experience, Strength, and Health. Help. Hope, hope. Experience, strength, and help. I like that. That's a better one. This is just a compilation of every story that was ever in the big book and was removed for whatever reason. They don't disappear. The stories are all in here. And his story was called A Different Slant. And it's in this, and it's the shortest story in the book. Okay, you want to start?
Yeah, so Fred, the one thing Howard mentioned is this guy is, we may not relate to his background a little because I mean maybe we didn't have we weren't a partner in a well-known accounting firm. So Fred's a partner of a well-known accounting firm. His income is good, has a fine home, is a happily married man, and the father of promising children of college age. It doesn't sound like alcoholic at all. And look at even more. He is so attractive a personality that makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it was Fred. Still doesn't sound like alcoholic. To all appearances, he is a
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. To all
well-balanced
appearance.
individual. Yet, drum roll, he is alcoholic. It says we first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover I'm a bad case of jitters. Maybe that's a nervous disposition, restless cerebral discontent, whatever. That's I'm just there for the jitters, you know.
He's another nervous guy.
Right. It was his first experience of this kind. He was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. There he goes again. You know, when I was a counselor, all the time alcoholics, those guys would come in there with track marks on their arms or whatever, or just drinkers, and they said, "I'm here to rest. I'm here to rest." And I would ask them this question: Are you here because of consequences, or here because you don't like your life anymore? And eventually, I would ask that question 3 or 4 times, and at different times, eventually they would say, "I don't like my life anymore." And then you know they're ready. The doctor intimated strongly that when he might be worse than he realized. We've heard that before. For a few years, he was depressed about his condition. There's another mental thing going on. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and standing. And so guys like that are hard to sponsor because they think they know everything, right? Fred would not believe himself as alcoholic, much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problem. So he's not interested in those steps. And
Don't take step one, you can't take step two.
right. And I always tell people this is, you know, you know, is in reality, we don't take step one. Step one took us a long time ago. And it's until we finally admit to that defeat. Let's look at this here. I like this because it kind of gives you a back seat over like how these guys work with these dudes. We told them what we knew about alcoholism. I don't
Mm.
think they told them, oh, you know what, you're just you drink too much. No, they talked about the allergy and obsession. You know, he was very interested and concealed that he conceded that he might have some of the symptoms. Hmm. Look at this. But he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. So he's not convinced he was hopeless. Howard, do you want to comment on any of that a little bit?
Oh my God, yeah. First of all, there's so much in this paragraph. This story is here to show us that you don't have to lose everything. I know I mentioned that before, but it's important to keep that in mind. This guy has lost nothing, nothing, and he still thinks self-knowledge is enough. To all appearances, he's stable, well-balanced individual. The outside, to the outside, he's a well-balanced individual. Does that sound familiar? Let's keep our place here on this page. And if you will indulge me, turn back to page 35. And on page 35, paragraph 2, we're talking about Jim. And in the middle of the paragraph, it says he's an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see. In other words, he's an intelligent man. To all appearances, he's normal. Same thing with this guy. They both put up good fronts. People think, look at the guy, he's great. He doesn't have any problems. Um, then they say to all. Then they mentioned we first saw Fred about a year ago. We first saw him. There's a lot of information in this story about how to work with somebody on a 12-step call. But this indicates once again that it is our job to call on the person, to approach the person. Somehow in today's culture, it became acceptable to make yourself available to the newcomer. Well, this book says otherwise. This book says over and over, it's our job, it's our responsibility, it's our obligation to approach the person who's struggling, who's new, who's suffering, and not wait for them to come to us. Remember what it was like for you in the beginning. So here, just going to slip that in. We first saw him. It also indicates that there's another visit, but we'll get to that in a minute. So he came to the hospital with a bad case of jitters. Again, he's another nervous guy. And he came to rest his nerves. I always wonder when people say he had a nervous breakdown. which nerve, which nerve broke. So I could be careful about that one. I'll watch out for that one. Um, For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. You bet. Incomprehensible demoralization. And then he did what we all do. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. Self knowledge, self will, self determination, self confidence, self deception. It doesn't matter. These are inadequate, insufficient, higher powers. And as Steve mentioned, if he does not believe he's an alcoholic, meaning he's not willing to accept step one, then of course there's no point talking about a spiritual remedy because he doesn't have a problem to remedy. If you don't have a problem, you don't need a solution. And here's another little thing I notice. Every time in this book they refer to one AAer calling on a new person, they always start the same way. We told them what we knew about alcoholism. Did you ever notice that? It's over and over in this book. Whenever an alcoholic, whenever someone of us calls on a newbie in this book, the way they begin it is by saying, we told them what we knew about alcoholism. So once again, there's a lesson in a 12-step call. What do you begin? What do? You tell them your story and you tell them about the allergy and you tell them about the obsession. And this guy felt he only had some of the symptoms. He's only a little pregnant. He's not totally pregnant. He's a little pregnant. Um, and he was positive that the humiliating experience, right, being in treatment and so on, and self-knowledge would be enough. Fear and self-knowledge would keep him sober. Right. We've all been through that. Um, I'll leave it at that.
I've had some experience sponsoring men that, like Howard says, don't have to lose everything, and a lot are successful in their minds. And one of them, when we get to step four, we'll see one of our most dangerous social instinct is pride, and that's false pride, where you kind of always worrying about what people think of you. Could a guy like this just be denying because he wants to prove himself? He wants to prove others wrong. Now, since we told him we knew about alcoholism, he was interested and conceded he had some of the symptoms, but was a long way from admitting he could do nothing about it. There's that pride, you know. So that's getting away from him, saying he's hopeless. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge was fixing. So his plan of recovery is one we still see today, is to rely on the mental defense of human suffering, humiliation and suffering. He's going to remember his last drink, and that's going to keep him sober. Let's see how it works out. And this is a shirt I used to have. We heard no more Fred for a while. And then, that's how it worked out right there. We heard no more Fred for a while. How many times have you looked around the rooms and gone, hey, what happened to such and such? One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was very anxious to see us. The story he told was most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuses for his drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination with all other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. It's pretty deep. Let him tell you, let him tell you about it. So if I remember we talked about the eyes and the other story, the personal pronoun. There's a few eyes in here. I was much impressed with you fellows said about alcoholism. And frankly, I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which produces treat. He appreciated that. But I was convinced, I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. Hmm. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as you fellows were, if as you fellows. That I had been usually successful in licking my other problems and, you know, other problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you people failed. That's what kept him there. He wanted to prove these guys wrong. That's a pride issue. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. People still do it all the time. You know, it's a very popular program in Alcoholics Anonymous, and not all the other programs. You know, will exercise their willpower and keep on guard. And they go to 4 meetings a day, and they relapse. I got to go to more meetings. So it's anyway. Howard, you want to comment on that last paragraph there?
Yeah, well, actually, the one before, incidentally, he was anxious to see us. So they planted a seed. They went to them, they called on him the first time. They told him what they knew about alcoholism. He said, thank you, no thanks, kiss my butt. And they left, but they left a seed behind. And so when this guy wanted what they had, he remembered what they said and he sent for them. He was anxious to see us. And it says here, basically, he was convinced he had to stop, who had no excuse for drinking, exhibited splendid judgment. Does that not sound like the alcoholic described on page 21 that says at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor once he starts to drink? That's a description of the real alcoholic, and that's what this guy is coming to realize about himself. It mentions in this last paragraph the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, belief in a lie. I reasoned I was not so far advanced. Again, self knowledge. He's saying he hadn't hit bottom yet. His excuses, these are excuses, these are rationalizations. The entire second half of this paragraph that Steve just read is nothing but rationalization and justification. I had every right to be self-confident, and it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. Now, if we were reading this book in a treatment center, that keeping on guard might be converted into saying, you got to watch out for your triggers.
Right.
Watch your triggers. Be on guard. Watch your triggers. Go ahead, Steve.
In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time, all went well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if, and this is something people always say, if I was not been making too hard work over a simple matter. One day I
Uh-oh.
went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would too. It was the end of a perfect day and a cloud on the horizon. So it's not a dark day. It's not what they call it, hungry, lonely, tired, whatever. He's not getting pulled over by the cops. It's not. It's a he says not a cloud on the horizon. Look at this. Oh
Yeah. Can I take it over at
yeah,
that point?
yeah. Feel
Yeah.
something.
But let me just remind you something. The end of the last paragraph said it was only a matter of willpower and keeping on guard. Watch for the triggers, right? Let's watch for his triggers. The paragraph Steve just read about. What are some of the triggers? Was he in physical pain? Was his sciatica bothering him? Does he have a cold coming on? Maybe he's got a bad attack of his IBS that day. Nope. Says I felt fine. So the trigger of physical pain is not there. Well, maybe his problem, he's having problems with the wife. Maybe he's having problems at home. Nope. He said, I have no pressing problems or worries. Well, what else could it be? Maybe it's the clouds. Maybe it's clouds. Nope, it's definitely not the clouds because there wasn't a cloud on the horizon.
Happy clouds.
Every clouds. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner and return to the rehab. Now, in my book, it doesn't say in return to the rehab because my book is telling a story of a man who believed in a lie. If he would have had that in the sentence, he would have been recognizing the truth, and this story might not have turned out the way that it had. But it also contains an identifying point. We have identified the trigger. It's not pain. It's not problems with anybody at home. It's not business problems. It's not about clouds. This man has a problem with thresholds. That's the trigger. He crossed the threshold. That was all he needed. It's just great stuff. That's the lie. He wasn't thinking at all. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail in my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. It's inside him now. He's
Now,
given into the obsession. Go ahead, Steve. Yes, some,
I know it just says that, or another, the allergy now as the physical factors hitting him now.
yeah. He makes a decision based on a lie. He puts it in him. Once it's in him, as Steve said, it's now physical. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. When I returned to the hotel, it struck me suddenly. We have two instances in Chile. You know what suddenly is? Suddenly is the sound the obsession makes when it strikes. Suddenly, right? We had our friend before. Suddenly, the idea about the milk and the alcohol. Well, suddenly, the idea struck me that a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. One. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. Anyone ever have any wake up doses? Yeah. I have a shadowy recollection. It's a blackout reference. So you
Blackout.
got yep, there's the reference to blackout, a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. Complete carnage. Complete carnage. He's driving around New York with a taxi cab driver and a pocket full of cash and a belly full of booze. Complete carnage is being created here. I know little of where I went or what I said or did. Blackout. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. In other words, incomprehensible demoralization, or he just got visited by terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. The four horsemen came to pay a visit. Steve?
Let's knock the rest of this out.
Okay. Yeah, and this guy, obviously, we're talking about his problem is he has no control, no power of choice over alcohol. So let's finish it up. You want to try and finish the chapter up?
Yeah, let's just see.
Let's blow through it. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that weekend in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I'd made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time, I had no thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied if I had an alcoholic mind. In other words, if I was not spiritually fit. Remember, we're about to read later in the book that we can go anywhere, we can do anything as long as we meet two criteria. One, we are spiritually fit. Two, we have the right motive. Well, here he says, if I had an alcoholic mind, meaning he's not spiritually fit, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They said I would raise a defense, and that one day I would give way. It would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. The lie. We're talking about an appalling lack of perspective here. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all.
Have a
I
comment.
knew from, go ahead.
So that line right there, just for what I learned about alcoholism, nothing came to mind. And so many, go to rehab and learn boatloads of stuff, and about drinking and using and all the triggers like how we talked about. And they're told not to go here, not to go to the football game, not to go to your neighbor's house, don't mow your lawn, and all this stuff, and to know those triggers, and they don't remember anything because obsession will always win out, and that's what happens. It's happened to me so many times, and that's exactly what this guy's going through.
Yep. He's having a moment of clarity too.
And
He says,
so
I
much.
saw that.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was going to say so much for think, think, think.
is another one. Yeah. Invite the predator in. Think, think, think. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in these strange mental blank spots. In other words, the obsessions. His moment of clarity just struck. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. In case you haven't noticed it, Fred just took step one. He begins step one. Two members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me, They approached him. They grinned. Yeah, I bet they said, we've been saving a seat for you, kid. Right? Don't you hate when people do that? They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and they asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic. Question number one. And number two, if I were really licked this time. These are the two parts of step one, and we have to answer both of them. If I thought myself an alcoholic, and did I fully concede this time? And he says, I had to concede. Had to is a must. Those of you who don't think there are musts in the book, had to is a must. And concede. Please note it doesn't say surrender. Surrender isn't anywhere in the first 164 pages of the book. Bill uses concede, concession, absolute, total, unconditional surrender. That's what concession is. They piled on me heaps of evidence. In other words, they told them their experiences to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition of the body and mind. They cited cases out of their own experience, again, them telling their story by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction I could do it myself. Apparently, he's now taking step one. Steve, you want to take the next one?
Yeah. Let me see. So is that where I kind of lost my place? Then they outline a program of action. Okay.
Well, then they outline the spiritual answer. Step two, program of actions, step 3 through 12, with 100 of them had followed successfully. That's where you are.
Right. Okay. So though I had only been a nominal church member, he's a small church member, these proposals were not infinitely hard to swallow. But the program of action, say 429, 412, whatever, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic, which means, radical. It is. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That's not easy. That was not easy. So maybe those conceptions were, God, the aspect of God he had, or, this is, only one way to God or something like that, or God's out here, or, maybe the idea of God within they told him about, maybe it's about, honesty or confession or amends. He had to throw these conceptions out the window. Look what he says.
Maybe he's saying ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were the driving force of his life, had to be cast aside and a whole new set of principles take their place. Maybe he
Right.
was saying that. Or maybe he was saying it meant I had to change. We can bring it down to one word. You got to change. Go
No,
ahead.
this part's But the moment I made up my mind to go through with it, go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my condition was relieved as a fact it proved to be. It sounds very familiar with it says on 14, where the revolutionary drastic proposals. And the moment I fully accept them, it was electric. The sense of victory, all that stuff, very similar. He says, remember, when Bill did that, and this guy probably did the same thing, it's like he had to take his old ideas of God, maybe stuff crossing, and wipe it all off and just have a new experience. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles, 4 through 12, would solve some of my problems, all my problems. Doesn't say some of it, all. You know, that's very important there. I have since been brought into a way of living more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. And that you hear this kind of muttered at meetings sometimes, and I like the way this guy says it. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange the best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back if I could. You know, that's the thing is you have to experience the world of the spirit before you can compare it to the old life. Oh, I mean, I've taken guys through the steps. My own experience. All of a sudden, you're like, wait a minute, when did this stuff get in the book? I read this before, you know? Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to the thousands like him. He had only felt only the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics could be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. So that was my experience. You know, brokenness. Many doctors and psychologists agree that with our conclusions. One of them, I think, isn't this Harry Tiebout? I think they're talking about. I think so.
I'm not sure about that one.
I think it's Harry Tiebout they're talking about. Staff member of a world-renowned
Oh
hospital.
no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is Percy Polyak.
Oh, okay, okay.
Polyak from Bellevue Hospital. I'll put up when we're done in a minute. I'll put up a thing on that. But let's finish.
Really made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight, in my opinion, is correct. As to two of you men and whose stories I've read, I think it's not Roland Bill, but whose stories I've read, there is no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless, apart from the divine help. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you even if I was able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach as the case is yours. For most cases, there is virtually no solution, no other solution beyond human aid. And this last little paragraph is what got me. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such defense. His defense must come from a higher power. So basically, what it's saying is you can have all the self knowledge in the world about alcoholism and your condition. You can read 100 books and go to all these meetings. And because of the obsession, it's not enough to stop the first drink. Human power cannot help us. Not our parents or wives, family, friends, other recovery people at meetings, even our sponsor, especially our own, of course. But God can. We might, and it's basically saying we gotta find God, you know, and the I'm going to tell you a big secret. You already have it. All you have to do is seek it. That's the thing. That's what, I oh, you could have told me at the beginning. This is not a program of not drinking. It's a program of finding God. So, we get rid of self. There's no way completely getting rid of self without his aid. Howard, you want to comment anything there a little bit?
Yeah. At the bottom of the previous page, it says, the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling, etc., etc. That's the second time in this story that he made up his mind to do something. The first time he made up his mind was to quit drinking. It said he made up his mind to quit drinking altogether, and he found he could not do so. So he tried to use his mind to stop drinking and couldn't do so. But he could use his mind to apply the solution. Couple other things, as Steve mentioned, the doctor who we're talking about on page 43 is Percy Polyak. For what it's worth, that's who this guy is. He was a close friend and supporter of Alcoholics Anonymous. He ran the psychiatric hospital at Bellevue in New York, which is a incredibly depressing place. But let me get rid of that because that's not what's important. But I did want to talk to you about what Steve had mentioned here at the end. His defense must come from a higher power. The entire point, incidentally, of this chapter, the entire chapter is summarized in this one paragraph. It's
Right.
Bill has an ability to do that. Sometimes it blows my mind. He took all of these pages to say all of these things, and he could have done it in one paragraph, which he actually does at the end of the book, too, on page 164. He could have stopped writing the book in the beginning and just put in 164, and we would know everything. But in any case, it says here his defense must come from a higher power. Therefore, the time has come for a fuller discussion on the delicate subject of belief in God. How Bill structured this book is incredible to me. He writes this and he says his defense must come from a higher power. Therefore, time has come. We can't put it off any longer. We've got to talk about this delicate issue of belief in God. And it's not a coincidence that the next chapter is called We Agnostics. Come next week. We're going to have a lot of fun.
You know what's interesting is if you Google or AI it nowadays, higher power, it will tell you a term that's used in Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't remember the book offhand where Bill got the term from. It's an old book, and I have it listed somewhere, but it's very interesting. So as Howard kind of said, tonight is the last night we're going to talk about the symptom of alcoholism, and from this, point forward in this book study will all be about our spiritual journey. So the fun really begins now for us. It's how to properly, take the program of action. And so it's about next week we'll get about into seeking God. And the truth is no one comes through these doors with the concept of what they really means to be spiritual. And next week we look at the spirit. Next week we'll start looking at we agnostics. So it's going to be fun. It really gets fun. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Incidentally, in case anyone's interested in the chat, I not only put a flyer for the window of opportunity presentation, but I put a link for the book. If you would like to make a copy of it, print it out, and use the workbook that we will be using for the next month, it's right there. If you can't get it, send me an email and I'll get it to you. But the link is there. If you print out the workbook, it'll be a lot easier to follow the next 4 weeks of the window of opportunity.